Hello, welcome back to our show, A Year of Magical Learning. We are up to book 48 today. Chris, why don't you take it?
Yeah, excited about this book. This book was an interesting book. It's called The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. Have you ever heard of it before?
No, can't say I have.
So this is one of my rare fiction books. I mean, I really enjoyed it actually. So the book's about this young autistic kid. His name is Christopher. And he's autistic. He relates well, like the description says, he relates well to animals, but he has no understanding of human emotions. He can't stand to be touched. He hates the color yellow. And the story is about the improbable story of Christopher's quest as he investigates the suspicious death of the neighborhood dog, and kind of how he is going about. He's like a detective basically, and as a autistic kid, and the whole perspective is from his point of view basically. And it was a really interesting book as he just kind of navigated through life and met people through the course of his day-to-day interactions and how he saw things and how he felt, the literal nature of how he was mentally approaching a lot of the tasks that were given to him, or the mental hurdles that he had to jump through to be able to make sure that he wasn't lying to somebody, but at the same time he's doing what he said he was going to do to this person. Anyway, it was an interesting book just to kind of fully immersed in that whole autistic kind of point of view. I found it pretty interesting. So the reflection title for this one is Everyone's View on Life is Unique. I started this reflection off actually with the quote at the very end of the book, was something that's kind of always stuck with me. Once again, this is a very literal person. Everything is very direct in how he speaks. At the end of the book, he wrote, I wrote a book, which means I can do anything, and I don't know why that kind of just made me, made me smile a little bit. That was like the very end of the book too. It has nothing to do with my actual reflection. It was just something that I agree with him. It's the habit of writing every single day and slowly but surely seeing what's in your head turn into a book on paper, and to be able to share that with other people. It's really something pretty magical, and it's hard. It takes a lot of day-to-day diligence and habit building, strong value system and structure to be able to keep you going and to keep persevering and enduring, all these other things, right? So I feel like if you can figure out how to write a book, you really can do anything. So I agree with the character at the end of the book. That was something that kind of just made me get the warm and fuzzies. But the actual reflection of this story for me is what this brought up in my own life was that everyone's view on life is unique. Obviously, this guy had a really particular view on life. You just sometimes forget that the person you might be talking to right now, or you encounter every day on the street, might be thinking something completely different and seeing the world completely different than the way that you're seeing the world, or the way that you think other people are seeing the world. It's just, the different paradigms that we view this world through is endless, really. And it's a great reminder always to be thinking through. It reminded me personally, the story in general, of a story that I've shared with you before, and I wrote about it in my own book, of a couple of days after my daughter had passed away. My wife and I tried to get out of the house just to do anything. It was hard to even get out of bed after our daughter passed away. We agreed that the first day after my daughter had passed away, we wanted to do something every single day to try to honor her. So my wife and I, we agreed to go try to take a walk every single night at the time that our daughter was born, which was 5:16 p.m. So we would go out. It was hard to even just literally just leave our home the first couple of times we tried this. But I remember distinctly, it's maybe like the second walk or third walk or something like that after Amelia had passed away. And my wife, Felicia, she was just bawling her eyes out as we walked down the street. And it was a beautiful spring day, like beautiful out. I mean, it was 75 degrees and mid-April in Indiana, best place you can be. It's, sun was shining. All my neighbors were out and about walking. There's a park right down the street from our house. So they were all having a good time, enjoying life out in the sun. And then, on the other side of the street, you see a man and a woman walking down the street, and one of them is bawling their eyes out and the other one's staring down at the road. I don't know about you, but what's the first thing you would have thought of if you and your wife and family were out walking back from the park and you saw a couple that one of them was crying, the other one was somberly walking down the street on a beautiful spring day? What would have been your first impression or thought of what
You're
was
the
going
bad
on?
guy.
For sure. I would have thought the same thing.
That guy.
Right. I would have, the last thing in my mind would have been, oh man, they may have just lost their infant daughter just 2 days before this or something along those lines. And they're just trying to get out of bed. The following months after that as well, I mean, I felt like I was living in a different world than pretty much everybody that was around me. I'd go to dinner parties with friends, family get-togethers, or stuff back at work, in the office, whatever it may be. Like, I was in a different world than everyone else. I didn't think about the same thing. I didn't, the same the same triggers of life and emotions weren't triggers to me anymore, like, or vice versa. Little things that shouldn't have been triggers were triggers, and like, I mean, I literally can't, it's hard for me to even describe the paradigm that I was viewing through life at that time in my life, but it was literally, I was in a different planet. I felt like, so hearing this story of Christopher and how he was, views the world and interacts with people. It was just a good reminder for myself that, like, everybody always views life, everybody has a unique lens on life. Everybody has a unique paradigm and unique experiences that have brought them to this moment that you're having a conversation with them today, and to respect that, and to be curious about that, and to learn, and to not assume anything. So that's the high level and overall, I guess, reflection for the day. What are your thoughts?
Well, so for me, the first thing comes to mind is, when you make assumptions, you're making as are you assumptions.
Yeah.
And so that's really, that's the thing, is one of these things. It's really true, just because our tendency to see, what was it, the saying that, what you see is all there is.
Yeah.
And that's the limitations in our human psychology, is we take the shortest route or shortest option, whatever that decision is going to be the shortest. And that's in terms of how we come into a decision. So when I see you and your wife walk down the street and she's crying, my mind would say, he probably did something bad. And that's the easiest way for us to make a judgment as quickly as possible. And I guess the problem is that we sometimes, most of the time, in most cases, it works out because of the system one from Daniel Kahneman, system one, system two. Because one is basically say, well, this is what I've seen before, and the likelihood of this is going to be like that is going to be the majority of the time, or it's correct. And so that's why we do it. But it doesn't apply to everything. And so we have to make sure that when we kind of come across something, especially to people, they are more than what is under the surface, right? So we can't see underneath. So we need to not rely 100% on system one, but rely on system two, conscious. Okay, let's think about it first before we start to say, well, that's how this person does, and that's the reason why they do it. But a lot of time, most of us, we spend the majority of our time inside our head, and whether we are happy or sad is because of how we think, right? We suffer more in our heads than in reality. Whether you're hungry, that's a physical pain, but most of our pain, like your headaches, your stress, and your worriness, it comes from your head. And we live in our own world. People do the same as well. A lot of times, if we judge people based on our heuristic, we will probably be wrong. Just because human nature is it's just, I think there is a exceptional category that we need to pay special attention to. So I'm not saying, like Kahneman saying, system one is actually the hero, right? Meaning that they are doing a lot of stuff and they are using that to
we wouldn't be able to do, like, if we were constantly, every single person we came across. That's too much to ask. You know what I mean? Like, I agree with you.
But I think there is a special case, I think, in the category of human emotions. We need to kind of pump the brake a little bit, just because we don't really know until, like, you probably haven't seen this kind of perspective until you read his book, because you don't have autism, so you don't know until you see from his perspective.
To be clear, I'm not sure that the author has autism either, so I don't know if this was like.
I think
so. Okay, all right, yeah. I hope he does. Otherwise, I feel like that's pretty messed up to write a book from anyway.
So if I were to walk down the street and I see your wife crying and you walking right beside her, right, I would not know that you had lost your daughter until I need to talk to you, until I do some system two processing, because otherwise I wouldn't know. The same thing with another story from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. He's talking about, the kids, the father and the kids, going on the train, and the kids were rowdy, and people are looking at him, and he's not even telling them to stop, and people look at him saying, why are you letting your kids do that? You're a bad father, blah, blah, blah. They didn't know that, they just got back from the hospital where the mom has, terminal cancer, and, it's not going to survive for for long. So
Yeah.
that you would never think about, but
I mean,
that's what people
he was
are.
in a different planet. I mean, like
Yeah,
that's a great example to give. That's how I felt like as well. I don't even know that I noticed my wife crying. I did notice other people looking at us, but I didn't care.
problem,
Right,
and
right,
it's much heavier than any other insignificant glare and stare at you. So
right.
I wouldn't, but at the same time, if you look back at it from the remembering self, you looking at saying people are actually looking and judging you and picking the best or the shortest route to that decision as possible. And to be fair, it's wrong, right?
I think you hit the nail on the head of what you see is all there is fine for most things. I mean, yeah, if you really wanted to engage your system too on macroeconomics or whatever things that you encounter every single day that you just take for granted and keep going about your day. But I agree with you of the human emotion side of everything. I think we've talked about this before in the past, like the iceberg example, right? The tip
Right.
of the iceberg. There's so much that goes into somebody's lived experience of who they are and how they got to be where they got to be today, that you have no idea. Like Will Smith is a great example of this, that whole Oscars slap with Chris Rock recently. I happened to recently read his memoir, so I feel like I know a little bit more that, what's underneath that iceberg. But at the same
Right.
time, there was a lot that was way more than just a slap.
He probably have some kind of, previous, I guess, experience with him and his wife for whatever reason.
Right.
And whatever that is, that his internal private atomic bomb that he had, right? It's just that it didn't trigger until he started to see her, and then that reminds him, and he just acted because the atomic bomb already happened. It
Right.
happened previously between him and his wife, or whatever happens in private, we don't know. And that's the thing is, people go and they judge. They judge because
Right.
he's a bad person or whatever. But the thing is, we don't know the whole story, and the fact is that human emotions, you only see 10%.
Right.
90% is deep hidden underneath, just like the iceberg would be. And so if you are judging a person based on the 10% that you see, the chances are you are going to be wrong. You'll
Yeah.
be wrong about your
Right.
judgment on that. And
Right.
to me, that's why I'm saying for emotions, try to pump the brake on the judgment until you know more. I'm not saying don't judge him. If he's bad, then he's bad. And if he's whatever, but don't judge him immediately without more information. And that's
Right.
what I get out from this conversation, from the lessons from this book. I mean, this book sparks the perspective of, what you see is not all there is. There is much, much more, especially when you encounter human emotions.
Yep. And everybody's brain's different, like this kid has a brain that works different than everybody else, but everybody does at the same
I'm
time.
not only
This
not
is
only
just
the
such an extreme
kid, but normal people,
right.
because you have a different experience and I have a different experience, because your experience makes you unique, and how you deal with it or how it triggers you makes you unique in that way. Because
Right.
even if, I mean, you don't have to be artistic to have this, because you
No, this
have
is
your
just an
atomic
extreme.
bomb.
This is an extreme example, obviously.
Well,
But
I mean, for your situation, also extreme example. I mean, how
right.
many
Right.
parents are going through the experience of having a preemie, right? And that kind of experience or atomic bomb or whatever event that happens to you and how you deal with it, that's completely like put you on the extremities of whatever spectrum of however you want to
Yeah,
label that spectrum.
but here's the key. I agree. Both of those are extreme events. And as we've talked about, our mission is balance, right? And that's what we hope to create, the ecosystem, the world that we want to create. However, we've also talked about this a lot. You can learn a lot from the extremes to bring them back to live a more balanced life. And I think as you're talking about this and applying this to your everyday life, I wrote this at the bottom section of it. It's these average folks remembering the lesson of that we're talking about, that like you're going to encounter people in your job or you're at the supermarket or whatever that are probably just having a bad day, or maybe they're having a great day or whatever. But the point is, like you said, don't assume. Like, seek first to understand. It's one of the 7 habits, right? Seek first to understand before you do anything, like when it comes to human emotions and interactions, right? And that's how you should navigate the world of how you interact with humans as best as possible. Obviously, it's there's never a carte blanche statement of they should always do this. I mean, to be fair, after we lost Amelia, I didn't even give a shit if somebody was, I don't care. I didn't care about if I came across somebody, you know, that had a problem. I didn't give a shit, you know, like, and that's fine.
Right.
I don't want to know about your iceberg. I gotta, you know,
You get
I
my
got a whole
own,
lot going
my
on.
own to
Right.
deal
Yeah.
with.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
So it's case by case, but I think this is a great lesson to apply to your everyday
Mhm.
life, you know, of
Right.
how you interact with people. And it's probably more important to do it in your everyday life, you know, when you're talking to that telemarketer that just called to do whatever, and you just want to lay into him because you're like just annoyed by him. There's just another person on the other end of that job. I don't know how they got there. I don't know what their goal is or what they're doing that day, but like, you know, chill out. You know what I mean? Listen and ask them
Right,
questions.
because sometimes
Right.
you know, sometimes you know, you going to need to be a telemarketer at some point for whatever, you
Right.
know, weird particular karma, or you know, whatever you want to call it. It goes back to, hey, you know, for whatever reason, you're the guy who's calling people.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I guess the moral of the story is like everybody is seeing things differently, and everybody has different lived experiences, and it's important for you to
Yes.
recognize that and to remember that when you're interacting with people. It was a great lesson to learn. This is a really good book too. I enjoyed it. It wasn't like super
Mhm.
long. Actually, I talked about it in the beginning. I actually stumbled upon this story because I saw an interview by Donald Glover, who I don't know if you know who that is, but his an actor. He was on the show Community. He's in a lot of movies. He was on that show Atlanta, I think, is his own show that he created. And then he's also a rapper named Childish Gambino is his rapper name. And he's like incredibly talented, like multifaceted, like writer, actor, producer, director, stuff like that. You know, I mean, this guy's just like super creative. And, you know, he mentioned this is one of his favorite books. And I was like, well, if Donald Glover likes it, it's got to be a good book to check out. So that was how I actually stumbled upon this book. Yeah, I would highly recommend it if you wanted to check it out and you were looking for a good fiction book. And, you know, I think there's a good lesson that can be learned there either way with this particular book. Any other final thoughts?
Definitely. I mean, I think that's the key is for us to not take everything for granted and not just see more and expect there's more than just what you see.
Right.
And you're going to have a better navigation through life.
Agreed. It'll be and you'll probably make more meaningful connections as well if you dig a little bit deeper, you know, and learn more about them and the platinum role, right? Well, you know, learning more about them. So the question we can leave for everybody would be, what would happen if you always sought first to understand in your life? Think about, ponder, and reflect about, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Right. Sounds good.